How you doing, brothers and sisters? Good. Friday, the first day of the conference, so we haven't got too bored yet, have we? Well, first of all, thank you for giving me such a wonderful introduction. My great friend Bruce Rayner is with me here. Where is he? He's somewhere around here, but I will certainly have to acknowledge Bruce here. Oh man, what a journey. You know, I just wanted, some good things have happened though. I certainly want to acknowledge the developed relationship that we've have with Airbnb, Unifor. I've come on board to use this as an opportunity to democratize the whole thing of home sharing, bringing resources and income to those communities that are certainly in a situation where they need as many resources as they have. I'm incredibly proud to be here in that capacity as well as speaking with you this afternoon too. Certainly the hosts that I've talked to and traveled around the country with have experienced extraordinary opportunities in this home sharing, not only creating additional income, but also creating additional relationships as well. That's a good thing. One of the bad things that has happened to me is that I just did my physical last year for a film that got me just recently, yesterday, for a film that I'm going to shoot in Vancouver starting next week. And the sad thing was not that I'm going to work in Vancouver. I have no problem. I love Vancouver. It's a beautiful city, one of the great cities in the world. But I realized that I'm no longer 6'3", but 6 feet tall. Now I'm figuring out how did I get to shrink 3 inches in that period of my lifetime. Now, I don't remember being 6 feet tall since I was a teenager, probably about 14, 15 years old, but I seem to have shrunk. Maybe that's all the traveling I'm doing and all the sitting on airplanes and all the wonderful work that I get a chance to be with men and women who are always on the edge of trying to make things better in the world, try to make things, bring change and bring great solutions to what changes we need in the world as well. If that's the course that I lose 3 inches, I'm wondering at 71 years old how tall I'll be in the next 10 years. Hopefully not another 3 inches. But thank you for the wonderful introduction. You know, I truly appreciate the opportunity to address Unifor once again. And the last time I addressed you in Vancouver, I introduced you to a great American and a great civil rights, human rights activist in Jack O'Dell. And Jack O'Dell was one of the confidants of Martin Luther King, and certainly gave a great deal of passion and energy to changing not only our nation, but also changing the world itself. He was the founder of Freedom Ways magazine and one of his editors in the 70s and 80s, and now he's in semi-retirement at 93 years old in Vancouver, writing his memoirs. And I especially mention him because I told him once again I was coming to Canada and that I would be speaking at Unifor again, and that he said, well, he sends his best is all. In the time we last spoke at this gathering, many things have changed in the world. There have been incredible displays of solidarity, community, of diverse coalitions of people organizing and mobilizing for justice. But sadly, some things have changed for the worse. There are many issues that we can discuss today, but as I contemplate on the theme, solidarity for a better world, not just simply solidarity for a better Canada, not simply solidarity for a better United States, but solidarity for a better world. I feel an urgency around the necessity of internationalism as a cornerstone of our approach to organizing, coalition building, resistance moving forward. Given the global connectivity of the forces that oppose us, we must reach across national borders, ideological silos, and cultural differences to seek sustainable freedom and justice in the world. We all know what is happening in my home country, your southern neighbor, the United States. It is going through what can only be described as a multifaceted socio-political crisis. Political discourse, the rule of law, fairness, honesty, procedural integrity, and civic values have all broken down, leaving our nation without an ideological safety net that could allow us to resolve our controversies productively. Just this past weekend in Charlottesville, Virginia, our nation became a grotesque spectacle on the world stage. We all watched a disgusting, violent rampage of white supremacist terror unfold in an American city. In the days since, have been appalled by an evocation of our current president as he failed to fully condemn violent extremism. While the events of Charlottesville and the election of Donald Trump were shocking, they are the culmination of several processes decades in the making. Nazism is not new to the United States or the world. Nazism was, among other things, the genocidal culmination of centuries of anti-Semitic and racist thought in Europe, spurred on by a major social and economic crisis. And it was heavily influenced by Jim Crow in the United States. Furthermore, American neo-Nazism can trace its origins to the German-American bond, which emerged in the 1930s in support of the rise of the Third Reich. In the past few years, right-wing populist movements in countries like France and the Philippines, Hungary, Greece, the UK, and others, and the Netherlands have introduced ideas that have been debunked and discredited time and time again. These movements of shifting the dynamics of global politics with an air of unchecked aggression that masquerades as the righteous urgency that has motivated our own movements for justice. In each of these right-wing populist movements, propaganda has played a key role and remains a mainstay of reactionary efforts to suppress radical movements all over the world. Just recently, in Canton, Mississippi, Nissan assembly plant workers lost their initial battle in the struggle to unionize. Nissan has 45 factories in countries all over the world, countries like Brazil, Germany, South Africa, Australia, Canada. Workers have union representation in 42 of those factories. The only Nissan workers without union representation are those who work in the 3 plants in the American South. 80% of the workers at the Canton plant are African American. And Nissan's anti-union propaganda campaign had unambiguously racist overtones. While the Canton plant opened when the Canton plant opened 15 years ago, 100% of the workers were permanent. Now, 40% of the Canton's plant work employees are temporary, only a portion of which are in programs to transition into permanent positions. The increasing reliance on temporary workers acts as a sort of ongoing threat to job security for permanent employees. Beyond its staffing practices, Nissan has aggressively suppressed its Southern workers' attempts to organize. Employees were deluged with anti-union literature. Supervisors interrogated individual workers. Anti-union videos ran on a constant loop in employee break areas, and groups of undecided workers were called into meetings to hear management lecture against the UAW, while pro-union workers were being excluded from such meetings. Nissan also used social media and talk radio in its threats to workers, to make outrageous racist remarks, to spread misinformation, and promote conflict. Activists on the ground in Canton says that the anti-union propaganda and campaign unleashed was one of the most stunningly aggressive and meticulous in its recent history of American labor movement. In Canton, in the United States, and in several countries around the world, propaganda rooted in blatant and easily refuted falsehoods has prevailed over reason, scholarship, and intellectual honesty as the economic anxieties wrought by neoliberal economic policies spawn an adherence to irrational and the comfort of ignorance. In the meantime, we are left wondering, how do we explain this world and these events to our children? How do we explain our own actions or inactions? How do we explain how we allowed an ideology of hate to endanger our most cherished ideals? These things did not happen overnight. There was a slow erosion, a failure of sovereignty and of the nation state itself in the face of globalization. Just as we can see the global nature of right-wing populism in this political moment, we must look to our own legacy of internationalism to reorientate ourselves, our communities, our unions, our movements, and our nations toward progress and justice. Dr. Martin Luther King, an American Baptist reverend, saw a reflection of his own spirit and path toward his community in Mahatma Gandhi's Satyagraha, incorporating it in his own nonviolent methodology of mass mobilization, using resistance as a cornerstone to transformation during the Montgomery bus boycott in 1955. Just as Dr. King looked at Gandhi's anti-colonial activism for inspiration and in turn inspired leaders all over the world, we must look to Dr. King's example to focus our attention on the movements around the world that need our supports. Dr. King also looked upon the civil rights movement not simply in terms of the state of African Americans, but as a critical site for building universal solidarity in the anti-colonial movement. What movements will we look forward to today in order to build international solidarity for a better world? For a better world. For starters, we may look toward the campaign of Bernie Sanders, a democratic socialist, and his Our Revolution, and others, toward campaigns to raise minimum wage, toward the struggle for universal health care, and toward the efforts to assist refugees, immigration, the demilitarization of borders, and so on. And the healing which is essential to all transformation. Many of us in the United States, and likely many in Canada, have become consumed in our domestic affairs. The 24-hour television news cycle does no favor to us on that front. As we sensationalize the often mundane and inane, we lose awareness of that and perspective. Without the rise of while the rise of right-wing populism is disturbing on many levels, the refugee crisis has intensified, the worst refugee crisis since World War II, demands our immediate attention. Just this past week, at least 50 refugees died when they were forced at gunpoint to jump overboard in the waters of off the coast of Yemen. This waterway, used by early man as a travel corridor, has become a graveyard for countless refugees fleeing violence, hunger, war, and despair. Many of them children, teenagers, and young adults. We cannot afford to allow national borders to contain our humanity, to limit our capacity to build community with one another. Cannot do that. In the moment, again, in this movement against climate change, for example, we see that people of color are the most vulnerable when it comes to rising sea levels, catastrophic weather events, deforestation, and ecological disturbances. We only notice the campaign of First Nation people at Sandy Rock, an example, water protectors, and how we must support their efforts as well, and all those who protect this fragile place we call Mother Earth. As labor organizers, we understand the intersectionality of racial, environmental, and economic justice. Multilateral trade deals and transnational corporations act in concert across national boundaries to actively promote the sort of conflict that has left our society in such disarray. We must become internationalists because capital and its capacity to exploit labor has become international. Throughout the 20th century, internationalism strengthened radical progressive movements through sharing ideas and tactics with one another, through inspiring one another, through providing one another with vital feedback and vital constructive criticism. The decline of organized labor and the simultaneous rise of the transnational economy are no coincidence. During the golden years of American capitalism, approximately 1945 to 1975, organized labor made a Faustian bargain to de-radicalize and to de-internationalize. In return, workers received monetary stability and prosperity as the elite laid the groundwork for the next phase of global capitalism. So we must say, for you, with fear to induce, we must spread the ideas of community and development. The passage of the Taft-Hartley Law in 1947 was instrumental in the shift, lifting or limiting labor's capacity to organize, and also spurring on the anti-communist movement, the McCarthy politics of the era. Also, the limited participation of American trade unions in international labor coalitions as well. This slow erosion of American and world labor internationalism has also been marked by outsourcing, deindustrialization, and more significantly, by mechanization. In a 1986 speech, Going Where We Have Never Been, Creating Communities for Our Future, James Boggs, a radical labor leader in Detroit from Alabama laid out the social history of the American economy in the years after World War II. Unprecedented economic growth, social, economic, and geographic mobility, and mechanization converged to erode the ecological and sociological foundation of urban and rural communities across the United States, leaving behind a nation largely unobservant of their own interdependence. In what can only be described as a precept, Boggs saw community building as the next great movement in America, and the reimagining citizenship, education, political participation as remedies to community despair, rather than as avenues for accumulating personal wealth. Cities were then more than the sites of labor and housing, but the environment in which Americans of all ages, races, religions, and gender identities could restore their social ties to one another. Yet Boggs' perspective was not without its precursors. African Americans made strides toward freedoms during the Civil Rights Movement, and not only because of their own efforts to agitate domestically, but also because of the relationship they built with radical movements around the world, anti-colonial movements across Asia and Africa and the Caribbean, and the civil rights movements. African Americans reached across national borders and religious affiliations, considered ideas and tactics from many different movements, including labor, and formed coalitions across cultural and racial lines to support their fight for freedom. African Americans personally engaged with leaders of the world, around the world, who were active participants in critical historic events. History shows us that true progress comes from collaboration, and the rise of internet technology has created new possibilities for connectivity and coalitions. Organized labor in the US and Canada must resume the aggressive support of movements for change and transformation. Movements around the world, we must look to the countries where labor is strong. We must draw on their strength to steer our elected leaders toward justice in these endeavors. We must also not recoil from addressing human rights issues and devising a working class vision of international trade, development, and investment. Labor organized internationally in pursuit of justice is formidable and necessary given the present structure of the world economy. We have an opportunity to reimagine ourselves as activists, as global citizens, to engage decisively and in solidarity to establish lasting peace and justice, and solidarity for a better world. Thank you.